Hello, and welcome to our third annual Self Care September series. We have been rocking and rolling with all the different ways that you can actually self care and not just hear the, what the heck does that really mean and how does it help me? Fantastic fantastic guest. And oh my goodness, I tell you, we are about to dive into some juicy goodness in your self care and burnout restoration journey. You're going to want to stick around. We're going to be talking about your nervous system and values and so much more, the things that bring freedom and fulfillment. Let's get started.
Burnout's kicking in hard, feels like a war zone. Can't keep dragging my feet, lost in the unknown. Careful jeans got the plan to lift me higher. Real self-care mantra, spark that fire. Energize, optimize, break the chains down. Feel the power in me, I'm gonna show now. Let the real self-care rekindle my spark. No more shadows living strong in the dark.
My guest today is Dr. Chelsea Turgeon. She is an MD, trained career coach, best-selling author, digital nomad, and host of Life After Medicine podcast. In 2019, she left the hustle and grind of her OBGYN residency to travel the world and create a life of freedom. Now she has a six-figure coaching business helping healthcare professionals find careers that give them freedom and fulfillment. And we're going to be diving into how to create that in your life. And I love this because today Chelsea is joining us from Bolivia. Welcome to the show, Chelsea. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Let's hope the Bolivian internet holds out.
Hey, we just got to rock and roll. We're traveling, especially when we're in different parts of the world. I've had things happen in hotel rooms when I'm doing shows or interviews, and I'm just like, we're just gonna roll with it. I even did like this huge keynote from a hotel one time, and I was like, okay, we got to find a landline, folks. We are not risking the Wi-Fi. And you just do your best, right?
Just do your best.
You do. So how long have you been in Bolivia?
I've been in Bolivia for 2 weeks, and before that, I was in Argentina for about 3.5 months.
Oh, wow. And so this is just a little smidge of the nomad digital life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I travel full time. So I'm always like, I don't have a home. When I explain it in Spanish, I say like, estoy sin casa, like I'm without home. And so then I travel just all around full time, living out of Airbnbs, hotels. And yeah, that's just been my life for the past 4 years.
That is so beautiful. And you created this life for yourself with intention. But I know that that started from a place of this is not working. Chelsea, can you share with us what was your burnout experience? What was sort of the journey that led to this beautiful life that you have now?
Yes. So my burnout experience really hit this peak moment during my second year of OBGYN residency. So this is back in the fall of 2018. And I'm like a year and a half in to residency. And I'm just like slowly and slowly starting to lose more and more of my energy, of my drive, of my motivation, of my will to just continue. So I would wake up in the morning and my first thought would just be like, oh my God, like not again. Like I can't believe another day has already come. And it felt so hard to drag myself out of bed. I had a dog at the time, so I would be just like scrambling to get the dog outside and then rush off to the hospital. And everything just felt really hurried. I would get to the hospital and just feel this deep sense of drain and exhaustion. And I was behind on all of the clinic notes and, all the things you have to do outside of just the day-to-day of being with patients and like being at the hospital. There's a lot of homework. Basically, there's a lot of things you're having to do outside of work, and none of that was getting done. So I just remember like my attendings would be calling me being like, I haven't received your clinic notes to sign. So things were just slipping all around, and I could tell I wasn't on top of things, but it was so hard for me to care, and I just felt so low, and I wanted to just escape. Like I kept having these escape fantasies about just like hopping in my car and driving to Utah and becoming a park ranger and just living off the grid. And so I had all these escape fantasies. I just felt really alone and isolated. I think that was another big thing because I would tell people that I was tired, but I didn't even know how to communicate the extent of like, I'm tired even when I sleep all weekend. Like I'm just completely exhausted. Like everything within me has been drained out of me. And it just felt so difficult to even talk about that with people. And so I felt really alone, isolated. And finally, one of my, I guess like people in my program were starting to notice that we don't think she's thriving right now. She's not really doing her best. And so on the final day of my GYN-onc rotation, they called me and it felt like I was being called to the principal's office. Essentially, my program director called me into her office and she knew that I was not totally set on continuing in residency. So I had talked to her a few months before and even like 6 months before that about feeling like, I'm not sure if I want to keep being a doctor. I don't know if residency is for me. I don't know if I want to stay on this path. So she kind of knew I was feeling some sort of way before I got burnt out. And then at the height of my burnout, then she kind of called me into her office and she was like, well, I don't want you to like cause problems for yourself if you decide you want to continue. Like people are starting to notice that you're feeling burnt out and we don't want you to essentially like shoot myself in the foot if I wanted to keep going down that path. And so essentially what she offered me was to take 5 weeks off and to take the next rotation, essentially a leave of absence. And initially when she suggested that, my first thought was just so much relief. Like I could sleep for 5 weeks. I don't have to keep getting up in the morning. That's going to be amazing. But then pretty soon after that initial gut relief, then I felt this shame and this like embarrassment that like, oh, I shouldn't need this time off. I should be doing a better job. This is so embarrassing that I'm struggling like this. So it was really interesting to observe how like first gut response, so much relief and like, oh, this is what I need. And then the next part, which was I think the societal conditioning coming in was like shame, like you shouldn't need that time off. So I did end up taking the 5 weeks off. And that's when I really started the burnout recovery journey. And it was during that time that I was able to connect back to myself, connect back to my values and what I truly wanted, and actually have the space and time to then make the decision to leave medicine and start off on a different path.
Wow, you just shared so much of the process, that we internally experience of like, oh, thank gosh. And then it's like, okay, but wait a minute. Should I really need this? I mean, am I impositioning people, and like all the stuff that goes through your head. I love his, you mean I could sleep for 5 weeks? It's like, I don't remember the last time I got to sleep more than like 24 hours. Right? It becomes so hard. Thank you for sharing that, Chelsea. From that point, from that 5 weeks, what happened in that 5 weeks?
Yeah. So during that 5 weeks, I basically started the process of coming back to myself. So in the years leading up to that, I had started kind of casually dabbling in some personal growth, some spirituality, some yoga, some meditation. I never really kept up with it because I was so busy, but I had some initial experience with that. And so during those 5 weeks, I really recommitted to all of that because I had this sense that the answer needed to come from me and like deep within me, and it didn't need to come from anyone else. And when I say the answer, I mean like the answer about what I wanted to do next, because I knew I couldn't return after those 5 weeks and have things be exactly the same. Like something needed to change, whether that was how I was approaching the whole thing from the inside, or I just needed to resign entirely. So I had this sense that this is not something I can just hold my breath for 2.5 years and power through. Like there needs to be a fundamental shift. And so I'm trying to figure out what that shift is. So I meditated basically every day. For the first 2 weeks, I slept so much. But then when I wasn't sleeping, I meditated every day. I journaled a lot. I have a practice of writing to my intuition. So it's essentially like two-way prayer in a sense. Like I'm writing and then I'm kind of listening and receiving answers and guidance. So I'm doing that, I'm doing yoga. I'm spending as much time outside as I possibly can. And it was through that process, like the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. Like I didn't have any clarity. I didn't have any aha moments or epiphanies. I was starting to feel more energized and rested because I was, filling my cup so much, but I didn't have any answers. And then it was really at the end of week 3 that I finally started to realize like, I can't go back. like that's not going to be my path forward. What I really want to do is I want more time like this. Like I want spaciousness. I don't want to be rushing, spending 80 hours of my week at a job that isn't right for me. So by the end of those 5 weeks, even like week 4, I think I had the decision that I'm not going back to residency. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to travel and I wanted to try to start an online business. And so my first guess was that business was going to be travel blogging. So I like bought a domain name and a travel blogging course and started blogging. And then I also stumbled upon coaching as well. So then I signed up for a coaching certification and started doing that. And so it was kind of writing and coaching that were always the center of kind of my next phase of life.
And when you reached the end of that 5 weeks and you had to go back to your attendings, what was the conversation there, Chelsea?
Yeah, that was hard. So the good thing was I was in touch with my program director throughout that time. So basically on week 4, we had been texting like at least once a week, how are you doing? Great. Not telling you anything. And then by week 4, we like did a phone call and I never said the exact words, but what I said to her was, I'm not excited about coming back. And she really took that as, okay, we're done here. She doesn't want to come back. I'm going to start getting everything processing and rolling so that she can resign. And so it actually was pretty nice that she had really set that up for me so that I came back. I had to like sign my resignation and we negotiated 3 additional months of me kind of working part-time, filling in some duties so I could still have a paycheck while I figured out my next thing. So that part, like actually working with admin, was pretty straightforward and easy, but it was really coming back in and reconnecting with my co-residents, the people who were in my intern class. And that felt a lot harder. And there was definitely more hurt feelings and anger. And it was not like a neutral time because those people were some of my best friends up until then, that's who I spent all my time with for the first 1.5 years. And then I come back into that environment and I'm kind of a pariah. And I knew that and I understood that was going to happen, but I just it's still hard to sit there and kind of accept that as you're working for 3 additional months and you're in a place where it's like, oh yeah, everybody hates me here.
In that 3 months, did that sort of solidify and give you even greater contrast for the clarity that you'd gotten in that end of week 3?
Yeah, very much. And the cool thing is, like, I look at it now and I just see how I'm very impressed with like the version of me who did go into work every day and was able to really see like, I get why they feel like this. I didn't even feel angry. I didn't feel any sort of negativity towards them. I just felt understanding around why they felt the way they did. And then I felt excitement and clarity for my next path. And so, yeah, I didn't like, even though it was hard, I still had a sense of, I'm so glad to be getting out and to be leaving this environment. So yeah, it really was confirmation in a lot of ways too.
I always say the contrast gives the clarity, and it's such a beautiful gift. And sometimes that contrast is really uncomfortable, but it is really, truly the gift in that. Well, Chelsea, as you packed your bags, as you departed on your first adventure, and you started to move into this place of really coming back to you in that process, through all of this time now, how would you define self-care?
Yeah. And so when I left, I left in February of 2019. I had a job teaching English in South Korea, and it was the first time I had lived abroad. And I lived abroad for a year in South Korea, and then for the past 4 years after that, I've been traveling to totally different places. And what I've realized is I didn't know myself at all when I was living in the US. I had never spent time with myself, really. I had just been defining what I wanted based on what other people expected of me or based on what was impressive or just kind of following societal expectations. And I realized there was this fundamental lack of self-knowledge. And that's important because self-care begins with knowledge of the self. So in order to care for the being that you are, you have to know who you are and what you need. And you need to learn how to respond to different signals within your body of hunger, not just like maybe the basic ones of like hunger, I have to go to the bathroom, I'm tired, but then also some of the deeper ones like, oh, there's a pang in my chest, there's a loneliness. Okay, what does this mean? So in order to be able to care for yourself, you can't follow someone else's checklist that they give you of things that might work for them. It's much deeper than that. It first starts with just relating to yourself, getting to know yourself, and spending time with you. And so that's really what I started to uncover as I traveled, because I'm the only person who was with me throughout all the different journeys. And that, I think that's a huge gift of traveling solo, is you just start to you're taking yourself with you everywhere, and you just start to develop this deep fondness for the being who's just been with you for all the different parts of your journey. I just remember one time sitting on a bus in Latin America and being like, oh my gosh, I really love myself. Like, I've been with me through all of this. And I didn't have that kind of relationship with myself when I was in the States. And so I think to me, it started with putting myself in a different environment where I didn't have any of the influences of home, so that I could have more space and more freedom to get to know and to connect to myself without there being anything wrong. Because I think sometimes we don't know how to connect with ourselves, or we don't necessarily want to connect and listen, because what if we want to be single for our whole lives and that's wrong because that's what society says? Or what if we want to, I don't know, like go on some crazy adventures, but society doesn't want that. And so if you have any of these external influences that are saying something may or may not be wrong, it's harder to be honest with yourself. But if you can kind of get yourself away from those influences and have that space and freedom, then it's easier to be more honest and just more present with really what is. And so I would say that's the foundation of self-care, is connecting to yourself, knowing yourself, so that then you can design and structure your life in a way that's in accordance with who you are, with what you value, and with how you want to live. Because when your life is structured in accordance with your values, it's just a lot easier to care for yourself. It's almost like you're kind of automating the self-care, because that's the way that your life is designed.
Oh my goodness, there's some juicy bits in this one. I mean, that awareness of yourself and going, I love me. Like, I actually like me. Like, when I remove all the judgy stuff and all the societal norms and the expectations, and I just sit with me, I love me. And that is a place that I didn't visit that place. I didn't even know that place existed till a few years ago, and I'll be 50 next week. And I'm just like, oh, I really love me. And it is this freedom. You know, you talk about freedom and fulfillment. That to me was like my biggest step into freedom, was loving myself finally.
Yeah, I relate to that too, because then it's like you love yourself. So I'm first and foremost responsible and accountable to me. And there's so much freedom that comes from that. It's like, yeah, sure, I can factor other people in depending on what place they hold in my life. But the main person who gets the final say in what I do and what I prioritize is me, because that's who I love. And so it just creates this clarity of decision. And I think freedom is such a good word for it.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And, you know, you dropped a little breadcrumb. We're going to pick it up and follow it. When we're talking about living out your values, you're like, okay, if we're defining self-care in this way, it's like allowing space for you to meet yourself, to really learn and discover who you are, to love who you are. And the biggest, sometimes the barrier there, or the gap, is that not living out your values, but not sort of what I call pressure testing them to see, where have they been masked? Where have they been camouflaged by things that we've agreed to, that other people have said we should do, right? Or the things that we've adopted because in the moment or that season of our life that did work for us or align, but we've not reevaluated it to shed it or to decide if we wanted to keep it or not. And holy cow, this is some big stuff to talk about when we're talking about managing and navigating our energy, because all of that goes into how we are either charged or depleted. We're taking a quick pause in the show to share an exciting opportunity. Self Care September is here. When you register for Self Care September, you'll get my exclusive self care guide filled with tools to help you unlock your best energy and well being. This month long event features expert guests discussing everything from pain relief and aging to measuring self care, staying out of burnout during a job hunt, and so much more. Plus, don't miss our special events like 20-minute micro recharge lab sessions with me, Carol Jean, yoga with Lori, and trauma informed meditation with Meditation Magazine's editor in chief, Kevin Ellerton. It's not too late. Join us today at whittingtonwellbeing.com. Now, let's get back to our self-care conversation. Chelsea, what are some ways like you are living out your values? I mean, you are a living, breathing example of this. How do you begin this process?
Yeah, I love what you said about our values can be masked, because that's so accurate. When I do this work with my clients, that can be one of the hardest parts initially is, how do I know what my actual values are versus like what are the should values that I kind of agreed to and accepted along the way. So for me, one thing I like to start with is connecting back to your body, because I do think if you have awareness and you're in tune with your body doesn't lie, and your body will tell you when you're doing something that's violating your values, when you're living and you're having an experience that is against your values. It can feel very visceral. It can feel like, let's say your value is like freedom or like autonomy or, something like that. And you're in a job where your boss keeps like rejecting the vacation time. Like you're trying to submit your vacation, and even the fact that you have to submit it could feel like, oh, this just feels off. Like, I don't like having to get my vacation approved. And then they reject it. And you're like, oh, like it feels like a punch in the gut. So it's those visceral feelings of, this is just plain wrong. Something's not right here. Feel like a punch in the gut or like a heaviness. And it's those things that you can't quite explain, but you have this deep sense that something is off. Those are moments where your values are being violated. And so if you can pause in those moments when you notice those things are happening, you can start to investigate, okay, what's going on here? What is the value that's not being met? Or even like in some instances, what's the value that's being violated? So when it's the opposite of your value that's happening. And so those are ways you can start to notice what your true values are, right? Because you're not going to experience this gut punch reaction against something that's not a true value. So then you can look deeper there and be like, okay, well, what's happening? Maybe I value autonomy over my schedule. I want to be the one to decide what I do when. Maybe it's that I value time with my family. And it's not necessarily that I need to have the full autonomy over it, but I just want more time with my family. Okay, so I need to be in a job that has more vacation, or maybe working part-time or kind of on a per diem basis. And so it's not going to be the same for each person, but I think just starting an investigation of any moments where you feel like that sense of something's off or something's wrong, trying to uncover what values are being violated there.
So Chelsea, do you have any insights or maybe some ways that those of us who maybe have been carrying some deep wounds, maybe we've got some trauma in there, and it doesn't feel safe, like everything in our body doesn't feel safe. How do we start to kind of pick out or pull out to identify those authentic values when our body may be reacting to a lot of stuff and we can't quite know, we don't know where to start?
Yeah. And I think that's like such a good question, is when we're doing this work, we're in the realm of, it's not black and white anymore. There's not right or wrong. We're not always going to know exactly. And so if we can start to adopt this mindset of curiosity and experimentation as much as possible, and realize that we may not always know right away, but we can try to get closer and closer to the truth. So it's like that game that you play with kids where like you hide something in the room. They're supposed to, wherever they walk, you're telling them warmer, warmer, or colder, colder. It's like, if we can sort of play that game with our values, and we can bring that approach into the uncovering of our values, that like, I may not I may not know with absolute certainty that this is a value or not, but I can start to get closer and closer. And the way that I get closer and closer is based on how it feels. And so, yes, so maybe the negative ones is not as straightforward for you because your body's reacting to a lot of things. But then do you experience a sense of more like relief or a feeling of kind of calmness or expansion in certain circumstances? Okay, can we go to those moments? What is true for you in those moments? Okay, like I feel just like a deep calm and relief when I look at my schedule and I see that this is in it. Okay, well, what does that mean? Or maybe I feel relief when I look at my schedule and nothing is in it. And so to me, I value spaciousness, right? Spaciousness of time. And so it's like, can you just start to look around for clues in your day-to-day experience of essentially when you feel things that feel better and more comfortable, it's potentially a sign that values are being met. So what are those? Can you start looking for patterns? And then when you start to feel like things are, like the punch in the gut and the less comfortable, that could potentially be a sign that values are not being met. So then what's happening there? And so I think just starting to play with it and see how closer and closer you can get to what's true for you.
Ooh, yes, I love that. I always say, put on your lab coat, be the scientist in your own life, and go about your day with compassionate curiosity.
Definitely.
Oh, guys, those are some really good tips. Like, you may want to hit rewind and listen just one more time to that one. That was really, really good. Because I think, when we've been in distress for a long time, and especially if it's something we haven't consciously recognized, it's been an unconscious state, and maybe it's been happening for so long that it's become our set point. It's our quote unquote norm. So we don't always recognize that our nervous systems have been in this amplified state, and that's not our natural state of being. And I know that you have some really great insights on, as we are in self-care, we want to give some really useful tools that will start to help transform, if you start to regulate and play around with what are the things that are helping me take care of my nervous system, that are allowing it to have some relaxation, where we're moving out of those heightened distressed, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop states, and actually have a moment where we're like, oh, I can breathe. Like, I can take a full breath. I didn't know what a full breath was. Holy cow. That was just like one full breath was a big deal. In those moments, how can we start taking care of our nervous system so that when we are observing our values and our physical response to the things in our life, that we can become more attuned to our body? Chelsea?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's like taking care of your nervous system. The first step is becoming attuned to your body in smaller ways. And so one thing I do and have my clients do is first thing in the morning, just ask the question, how am I feeling right now? And even as a precursor to that, because sometimes when we say, how am I feeling, we'll still go cerebral, we'll be like, oh, I'm feeling something, but we kind of reach in our head for a feeling word. So even before that, you could start asking, like, what am I noticing inside of my body? And I try to just take a few moments. You can close your eyes if that feels safe for you, or you can just kind of put your gaze in a lower place where you're not observing much, but just trying to turn your attention inwards and asking, like, what am I noticing that's happening inside of me right now? And it can just be simple things like, okay, I notice there's a gurgling in my stomach, so I'm like digesting something. Okay, I notice that my foot's asleep. Great. Okay. But it's like really just taking this time. And sometimes, especially if there is a history of trauma and it doesn't feel safe to be in the insides of the body, usually there's more neutral areas of the body, like the hands and the feet can feel more neutral. And so even starting with those can be helpful. But even just that process of pausing to turn your attention inwards, it's called interoception. So it's like paying attention to the sensations that are coming from inside your body. And just by stopping to pay attention to them, you start the process of regulating your nervous system. So I would say that's a really huge first step is just like having a practice of interoception first thing in the morning to just notice where your nervous system is at.
What have you found is as you start to move through that and maybe that becomes your practice, maybe that's the one place in the whole day that you just take, 30 or 60 seconds to just go, okay, I'm waking up. What am I feeling? I'm going to turn inside, right?
Yeah.
How do we start to build on that practice? What would be the next step?
One thing I love, because I like metrics to some degree, I like having like not real, because your feelings are real metrics too. But I think especially when you're first starting out, it can feel hard to rely on your feelings. And so it can be nice to have really like external biofeedback information. And so one thing I like to do is track my HRV. Have you heard of that? Yeah,
Yes.
obviously you've heard of that. So for your audience and for people listening, HRV, heart rate variability, essentially it's a measure of, I think of it as how well your nervous system has recovered from stress like the day before. And so I will measure that every morning, and I don't have a fancy, like I want to get the Aura ring. I don't have anything like that. I think Fitbits and things like that can have that tracking, but I just use this app called the Source app. And so I can send that to you, but it's something where you can literally take your HRV through using your smartphone. You can kind of put your finger on the camera and the light, and it measures your HRV. And so I do that every morning. And that gives me a sense of, okay, am I in recovery mode? Am I in push mode? And that gives me another level of information. And then within that app, it also has you pause and ask yourself, okay, well, why do you think your HRV is this way? Like, let's say today I had recovery mode. So it was like, well, why do you think it is that way? How did you sleep last night? What did you eat? How did you take care of stress yesterday? How did you move your body? So it's kind of like going through a bit of a checklist, which helps you just start to pay attention to what was I doing yesterday to support my nervous system? And what can I start doing differently? So I notice when I do a yoga nidra practice during the day, the next day my HRV is much better. When I laugh a lot with friends, even if I have not slept as well, like significant laughter really recharges my nervous system. And so it's by kind of asking myself those questions in the morning in response to that metric. Then I'm reflecting back on the days and I'm starting to pick up on patterns of things that really recharge me and of things that maybe are less recharging and that I need to, like, if I'm having more stressful moments, like how can I create more space for the things that recharge me? So I think it's like this pattern recognition throughout my day that has been really helpful.
Ooh, I love that. And one of the things, and I love that you use HRV, heart rate variability, because that's one of the things that has been such a really useful tool for me that I check in with myself and I look to see just from my physiological side, because there are times where I might feel a ton of feelings or they haven't quite processed yet, and I'm not sure what they are. I can kind of feel them bubbling under the surface, but they're not in a place where I can, in my conscious mind, ascribe a description to them or pinpoint them. So sometimes I can just start with that one little metric that really helps. So Chelsea, as you kind of move through that process, what is something that you think also kind of helps you set up for starting to recognize those moments of laughter, the yoga nidra, and how that was making you feel? Like for me, I started a very intentional 5 things gratitude practice. And at the end of the day, or even just, I was even doing it like midday because I was like, I'm not going to remember that. Like my working memory was really crud when my burnout was bad. So I started to do it in these little chunks throughout the day because I was like, I won't remember. But that reflection and that gratitude of just being able to identify the places where I felt good in the day really helped. What are something like that, or is there, maybe a variation of that you do to start identifying those places?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because I do think having those just sort of micro moments of awareness is really helpful. And so for me, what I do, and I do this most days. And when I'm doing these, I call them my micro routines. When I do these to bookend my day, and they're each about like no more than 10 minutes at the beginning of the day, 10 minutes at the end of the day, that's what keeps me sane and like grounded as I travel, because I move around a lot. And there was a time when it was really dysregulating for me. And so I have learned just by doing these two like bookend things, which I'll share, that has helped me just regulate in all of these crazy ways. So the morning one is like I shared, I wake up, I'll do either a 5-minute meditation on my insight timer, or if I'm running behind, I literally will just close my eyes for a minute and just say, what am I noticing? And then I write it down. And then I do my HRV, ask the questions about, why do I think that happened? And then I just check off like that I did that. And that's it for the morning usually. Sometimes I'll do a little extra if I have more time. If it's a Saturday, I'll like read some Pema Chodron or whatever, but that's my like bookend or like my micro have to do routine. The end of the day, micro routine as I'm getting into bed, then I write down 3 things I did well that day so I can remind myself that I do things, even if I didn't do it all, or even if I, didn't finish my whole to-do list, it's like, I still do things well. And that was hard to start doing at first because I was like, well, I had a client call, but did I do a good job? I don't know. And then I decided to make the metric of if I show up, that's me doing it well. And so I can write it down. And so when I kind of lowered my baseline of like showed up for this, showed up for that, then it's easier to then remember. And I like had this really cool insight and I was present with them about this. But my only baseline is like, did I show up for it? And so I write down what I did well. And then I write down 3 moments of gratitude from the day. And I notice that when I'm in that practice of writing down the gratitude at the end of the day, my brain starts to be conditioned all throughout the day to be looking for like, okay, what are my gratitude moments going to be? And what are the things I did well? Oh, I can write this down later. And so I'm kind of like just paying more attention throughout the day. And I have a filter that's more primed for gratitude and kind of patting myself on the back, which is really nice.
Rooted in science, backed by psychology, micro recharge lab moments right here, folks. There we go. I love it so much. Chelsea, I know you have a fabulous podcast where people can tune in, learn more, follow you, learn more about you and your journey at Life After Medicine podcast. Where else can people find you? Where do you love for them to connect with you, to say hello, to let you know, hey, Chelsea, I heard the episode and this was my favorite part.
Yeah. So podcast is a great place to tune in to the things that I'm posting. And then we also have a Facebook group. So what I think of is like the podcast is the way I talk to you guys, but it can feel kind of like I'm talking to a wall sometimes. So the way that you guys can talk back and the way that we can interact and create community together is within the Facebook group. So that's the Life After Medicine Facebook community. And what I actually do within that is I have the guests who have been on the podcast, they come in the day that their episode is aired, and there's like a comment thread Q&A that happens. And so there's like ways to interact with the guests further, and we just get to really create this sense of community there. So that's another fun place to interact together. And you're also welcome to send me a message on LinkedIn or in my email.
Fantastic. Chelsea, who is the perfect person to join this group? Who are you looking for? Who is this for specifically? Is this somebody, do you need to be in healthcare? Are you shifting careers? Who is it that this is really for?
Yeah, you don't have to be in healthcare, but I think a lot of people tend to be in healthcare or kind of in healthcare related fields. So maybe like helping professions is a very common type of thread. So you're in these helping professions, but you are wanting to embrace a more like holistic and freedom-based lifestyle. Those are the kind of people who tend to come into the group.
Oh, fantastic. So if that's you, you have a place, you have a spot, you have a community. Go check out Life After Medicine podcast. There should be an episode there with me on it when hopefully will be out by now since this is September. Yeah, we're recording a little early. So you guys can go check that out and all the incredible guest lineups that Chelsea has over there. Chelsea, what is one thing that you would love to leave people with today that's on your heart, that if somebody is right now, they're sitting in that place where they are in that place of burnout, and it's that I just cannot show up and be here one more day. This is just not where I want to be. What do you want them to know?
Yeah. So life is hard, but this is not the hard that it's supposed to be. Like, this is not the type of hard that you're supposed to have to live with and power through and just work through. The type of hard where you feel depleted, where your needs are not being met, like that's not the kind of hard that we're going for. There's something that's been really powerful for me is realizing there's a right kind of hard and a wrong kind of hard. And that's very individual for each person. But I would say for most people, it's the wrong kind of hard if it's depleting you and making you less and less of the person you want to be. So for me, the things that are hard, the right kind of hard that I want to lean into is the things that are helping me grow, that are helping me become more compassionate, more caring, more loving. Like those are the kinds of hard that I want to work through and accept and kind of, realize like there is some things that are going to be hard, but the things that are supposed to be hard are not, like you're not supposed to feel like a shell of a person. Of course that's going to happen, but I say like it's not supposed to be like that because I don't want people to feel like this is just what life is and this is just what being an adult is. Like as you share, you were in this chronic cycle of burnout for years and it can just feel so normalized. And I want us to just not normalize it as much. Like there is a way for you to feel well rested and nourished and cared for. And so how can we really dig deep to figure out what is missing using your framework? Like what are those nourishment keys that are missing so that we can really start to like take care of you to bring you out of that state?
Oh, beautiful words to leave us with today, Chelsea. Thank you so much. Guys, we'll see you next week to continue the conversation.
Thanks for being here. It's been quite a ride. Energy mastery, let's turn the tide. Top shelf guests, dropping wisdom bombs. Join us next week where the energy's strong.